So our final award recipient this evening, Thomas Friedman, is a Minnesota favorite son and a man who really needs no introduction, but you're going to get one anyway. Over his impressive and prolific career as a journalist, an author, an interpreter of geopolitics, and a keen observer of humankind, Mr. Friedman has elevated our collective understanding of the world and our place within it. 20 years ago, Tom Friedman helped us grapple with the nuances of globalization when he wrote his book, The Lexus and the Olive Tree. And then 9/11 happened, and the world shifted under our feet. Friedman's powerful and often very, if you remember this, you'll recognize this, his very powerful and very personal post-9/11 commentaries in the New York Times won him a Pulitzer Prize. I was very moved by them personally, and they were compiled into his 2002 book, Longitudes and Attitudes. Friedman has written several books since then, many of them bestsellers, and he continues to inspire and challenge us with his writing. Chris Farrell of NPR and Business Week commented about him. Friedman is a card-carrying global optimist. I don't know, you might want to correct that record now, I'm not sure, Tom. And he excels when analyzing just how a new international system or a new world order is in fact replacing the old. And when I read Tom Friedman's work, I have to say I couldn't agree more. Last year, Friedman took what I thought was a slightly different focus in his writing when he published the book, Thank You for Being Late, which offered us real insights into navigating the breathtaking pace and complexity of change in our contemporary world. I believe personally that it was also something of a love story to your hometown of St. Louis Park, and I loved reading that part of it. Here's what one reviewer commented about the book, Thank You for Being Late. The 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner puts his familiar methodology, extensive travel, thorough reporting, interviews with the high-placed movers and shakers, and conversations with us lowly moved and shaken to especially good use here. He prescribes nothing less than a total redesign of our workplaces, our politics, our geopolitics, ethics, and communities. This is required reading for a generation that's going to be asked to dance in the midst of a hurricane. In addition to his tremendous books, most of which still grace our bookshelves in their original paper form, if you remember what that is, this best-selling author is, of course, also a renowned reporter and columnist with the New York Times. I understand he's also a formidable golfer, but I've not seen it in person, so then we'll have to see if that's in fact true. I'm so proud to introduce to you the 2018 Hubert H. Humphrey Public Leadership Award winner, a New York Times Foreign Affairs columnist, Pulitzer Prize-winning and best-selling author, Thomas Friedman.
Dean Bloomberg, thank you so much. It's truly an honor. I've been honored before, but not by, there's something special when you come home, I got to tell you. And the Humphrey School, and it's great. So great to do a neighborhood concert, I got to tell you. People often ask me what I do for a living, and I try to tell them that what I do for a living is that I'm a translator from English to English. I try to take really complex ideas and break them down, first of all, so I can understand them, and then hopefully share them with others so they can understand them. And, you know, in the opinion business that I'm in, there's a lot of ways to leave your mark, and you can leave it with strong opinions on the right and strong opinions on the left and strong opinions on the center. But what I've felt, the source of my idealism, is actually to be an explanatory columnist. And I live by Marie Curie's motto, especially today. Now is the time to understand more so we may fear less. Because we are in a really complex, swirling moment. And there are a lot of people taking advantage of the confusion right now to sell fear and propel themselves by it. Whenever young journalists come to me and say, I want to do what you do, what do I need to know? I always tell them you got to be able to type fast, first of all. I can really type fast, I got to tell you. I actually went to secretarial school, night secretarial school in London to learn how to type, and I can really type fast. You need to know some history and some geography and some science and literature and all of those things, all very, very important. But I always tell young people there's actually two things you need, I think, to be a successful journalist. The first is that you have to like people. And you have to enjoy hearing the crazy things they say, fear, hope, aspire for. If you can't hear the music, you'll never be able to play the music. And maybe it's the Minnesota boy in me, but I've always liked people. I'm always struck at how many journalists hate people. But that's something that came naturally to me. But there's the other thing you really need, I think, to be a successful journalist, though, is you have to be a good listener. And it's for two reasons. And the second reason is actually more important than the first. The first reason is it's amazing what you learn when you listen. But the second reason is because what you say when you listen. Listening is a sign of respect. And it's amazing what people will let you say to them if they think you respect them. And the first way you convey that is through listening. And I mean deep listening, not just waiting for someone to stop talking. Now, before I leave, I had the pleasure of having dinner with the dean last night and several of her incredibly impressive colleagues. We closed the bar or the restaurant, I don't know, we went way over, we were in triple overtime, okay? And one of the things we were talking about is it's really important today, is where does my optimism come from? I really try to be the one person on the page who keeps the light of optimism shining. People tell me if I go dark, they really get depressed. So where does my optimism come from? Drugs. I use a lot of drugs. No, it's a joke. It's a joke. Don't tweet that. It's a joke. These days I feel it, though, sometimes. As you know, I covered the Israeli-Palestinian conflict my whole life, and I don't know, about 10 years ago, Haaretz, the Israeli, really the New York Times of Israel, runs my column in Hebrew, very important to me. And I was at a dinner like 10 years ago with the editor, and I said to him, why do you run my column? And he said, Tom, you're the only optimist we have. And there was an Israeli general at the dinner, Uzi Dayan, and he said, Tom, I know why you're an optimist. I said, why? He said, it's because you're short. And I said, short? He said, yeah, you can only see that part of the glass that's half full, okay? Well, the truth is I'm not that short. I am an optimist still. And I think the way, or the sources of my optimism today are fed by three different rivers, as it were. One way I stay an optimist today is by standing on my head, I have to tell you. Because as someone who's spending a lot of time now traveling the country, and my last book, going back to my roots, I can tell you the country looks so much better from the bottom up today than from the top down. It's not that we don't have failing and struggling communities. We do. But as you heard tonight in my fellow awardees, there's massive social innovation going on today at the community level. It's one of the most exciting things, I think, going on in politics today. So what is this innovation? What's it about? And why is it so necessary? Well, I think we are at a giant inflection point. I mean a Gutenberg scale inflection point. I tell people all the time, someone was alive when Gutenberg invented the printing press. And some monk said to some priest, now that is really cool, okay? You mean I don't have to write these Bibles out longhand anymore, where you guys just stamp them out? Well, I think we're at a similar, incredible inflection point. I think we're in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. I think we're in the middle of a change of the climate of the climate. We're going from what I call later to now. So later was when I was growing up here in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, because later was when I can clean that river, purify that lake, rescue that wolf, that endangered species. I could do it now or I could do it later. Well, today, later is officially over. Later will now be too late. So whatever you're going to save, please save it now. That's a climate change. We're in the middle of a change in the climate of globalization. We're going from an interconnected world to an interdependent world. An interdependent world, you get a real geoeconomic inversion. Your friends start to be able to kill you faster than your enemies. If Greek and Italian banks were to go under tonight, this room would have been half full. Greece, Italy, wait a minute, they're in NATO, they're in the EU, they're allies, but in an interdependent world. They can kill us, and in an interdependent world, your rivals falling becomes more dangerous than your rivals rising. If China last night took 6 more islands in the South China Sea, personally, I really wouldn't have cared. If China lost 6% growth last night, this room could have been empty. That is a climate change. Lastly, we're going through a climate change in technology. Machines are acquiring all the attributes of human beings. The ability to think, to reason, to learn, to drive, and manipulate. No generation of the human species has ever lived in such a world. So we are at a major inflection point. And what I find exciting about this moment are 2 things. One is, I wrote about this actually for tomorrow, I think all the major political parties now around the world actually are blowing up. And they're blowing up because these climate changes just don't correspond to their long-held agendas. So there's a huge flux going on. And we see it here and in Europe and all over the world. But what's really exciting is what's going on at the local level. It's communities like this one creating what I call complex adaptive coalitions, where business comes together with educators, comes together with philanthropists, comes together with social entrepreneurs and innovators, catalyzed by local governments, and it's happening all over the country today. There is massive innovation going on at the community level. You would never know it because we're so focused at what's going on in Washington and the White House. But it is a huge source of optimism for me, because if and when we get beyond this kind of national crisis, I think you're going to find a huge, rich soil going on, being enriched at the community level. Second thing that gives me optimism is when I come home. And I come home a lot. And as Laura said, I did write a love letter to St. Louis Park, because I came to realize after 40 years of traveling the world that we had a really special thing going on there. Hard to explain St. Louis Park in the 50s and 60s to people, and how all these weird people came out of there. I always start by saying, try to imagine if Sweden and Israel had a baby, okay? And start there, and you'll have some sense of what was going on. But what was built there, what made our own little inclusion and inclusive challenge workable and producing something lasting, there was a high level of trust. It wasn't just in St. Louis Park. It was in Minnesota. It was in Minneapolis. It was in St. Paul. Huge problems in all these places, but relative to the rest of the country, there was this high level of trust that was imbued by the political leaders of that time: Humphrey, Mondale, McCarthy, Arnie Carlson. These were guys who built trust, and as my teacher, Dov Seidman, always says, trust is the only legal performance-enhancing drug. Oh, when there's trust in the room, it's just amazing how high you can jump and what you can do together. And it's the doing we do together that matters most. And so I left this place in 1971 carrying in me this sense that politics can work, because I lived in a community and a state where I saw that happen. And I took that optimism around the world for a spin, and I come back regularly to be reinvigorated and nourished by it. And I know this is a different time and a different age, and the state is challenged by the venom coming out of Washington these days, but we have something real special here. You have something real special here. And it's changing and it's evolving, but that special, that trust, man, hold on to that. Minnesota can be a real beacon for the future if and when we get through this storm. And the last thing I do, I was telling Laura last night, when I really starve for some optimism, I hang out with the U.S. military. I've had the chance to travel with our military all over the world, and last August, I actually took the most amazing trip of my life. The head of the U.S. Air Force, General Dave Goldfein, asked me to accompany him on a trip to all the U.S. air bases in the Middle East in the middle of the ISIS air war. And I was, saying to the dean last night, as a columnist, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. Oh God, when that happens, it's so great. But sometimes you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And last August, I found myself at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar on a Tuesday night when my column was due, just as Donald Trump was giving his Charlottesville speech. The entire world was listening to this rant. The news pages were burning online. And I was in Al Udeid Air Base with my column due in 90 minutes. And I was thinking, what in the world am I going to say? I'm about to look really stupid. And then I had I have to say, it was just a real cloudburst. I thought about my little traveling party. And I realized that I was traveling with the Air Force Secretary, Heather Wilson. She's a woman. Traveling with her executive officer. She's an African-American Air Force woman, Lieutenant Colonel. Traveling with the head of the U.S. Air Force, Dave Goldfein. He's Jewish. Traveling with their guard. His name was Juan. Meeting with the head of the U.S. Air War in the Middle East. He's an Armenian-American. His deputy was a Lebanese-American, and our intelligence briefer's name was Mr. Yang. Mr. President, which part of this sentence don't you understand? Okay. That is what makes America great. And every once in a while, you got to be reminded and renourished of that. But I was also telling the dean, and I'll close with this story, that we were in Afghanistan, and we were in Kandahar, at the air base there. And we had to leave very early in the morning, 6 a.m., got up bleary-eyed to get on our helicopter with our little traveling party, and the Air Force chief said, there's someone here who wants to meet you. Turned out he was the base chaplain. Turned out he was from Buffalo, Minnesota. And he was a fan and just wanted to come out and chat. He got up at 6 a.m. to meet me. And so I was talking to him, and it happened to be, few weeks before the Jewish high holidays, and I said to him, what do you do for the Jewish soldiers on this base? And they're probably like 6 or whatever. And he went into great detail of all of his efforts to make sure that the 6 Jewish soldiers on his base in Kandahar, Afghanistan, would be able to properly celebrate the Jewish high holidays. And as I took off from this country, I was looking at the mountains below, I was just reminded what an amazing place America is when we are at our best. That the Lutheran Air Force chaplain in Kandahar Air Base in Afghanistan is planning the high holiday services for his 6 Jewish soldiers. And so we have a lot of work to do, but we have so many great sources to draw on. We have so many great institutions like this school to mine them. But this thing we have here in Minnesota, it's really important. It's high trust. It's not perfect. It's got millions of problems. But it's so much better than so many other places right now. And what you got here, you've got to preserve. That's your charge. That's the Humphrey School's charge. Because in the next couple of years, the country's going to need it more than ever. Thank you very much.